The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Andrew Wiggins banks it in, and the Timberwolves, an unbelievable win. Towns fakes Jokic out, slams it home. Oh, baby. Number 25 for Philadelphia. Butler down the other end. The reverse flush. 3 seconds. 1 second. The drought is finally over. 13.
Wolves wired.
Why are you mad at me?
I'm not.
That was a mad face.
Because the Timberwolves lost, and it's commonplace in the zone coverage Slack that everything's your fault. So
it's Tom's
send your
fault.
Hey mail to Tom Schreier for the Timberwolves falling in 5 games.
At T Schreier 3 on Twitter.
Yeah,
Just send him all your hate.
I'll wear this one.
The Timberwolves season is over. The Wolves lost in Game 5 in pretty convincing fashion. The route of the loss was similar to Game 4. They're up at halftime. They had a 10-point lead in the first half, and then the Rockets' onslaught started in the third quarter, and it was pretty much over by the end of the third. We all watched the game.
James Harden did James Harden things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are your thoughts on Game 5? We probably don't have to just talk about Game 5. We can talk about the playoffs as a whole, but we can talk about
that's the thing.
Itself,
if we talk about Game 5, it was like the Wolves again played a pretty decent first half, and then in the third quarter, James Harden did things like he did all season, and why he will probably win the MVP. We've run this story back a couple of times now in this series, and it's not entirely surprising what happened. I don't think any of us are shocked that the series is over right now.
Yeah, I think related to that, and this kind of probably goes to my biggest takeaway from the game, is just some serious underwhelming play from Andrew Wiggins, and just kind of I was writing about Wiggins I knew for after the game, so I'd watched a lot of his stuff specifically from the series, just Wiggins, and watching him defend Harden was just so bad. Which is everyone's bad at guarding James Harden, like objectively. But
he's good.
For Andrew Wiggins to pretty clearly have been throughout this series the weakest on-ball defender of James Harden is just a really disappointing, development. And for Derrick Rose to have been better in that realm. Obviously, Jamal Crawford didn't really get the matchup. That probably would have been worse. But
yeah,
I mean, Jimmy Butler was the best. Derrick Rose wasn't great, but was still served as like somewhat.
He was
a
passable
blockade.
Considering who he was guarding, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Wiggins just he relies on his athleticism. That's the overarching narrative of his game. And defensively, when you're going up against another great player, another great athlete, if you're operating purely on trying to use your physical skills to stop them, it's not going to work. He was punished earlier in this series by the step back, and he just blown by Harden, plenty in that game, and he falls into those when he hits those ruts, he lives in them, and we saw that in the first quarter. He started 0 for 4 from the field, missed 2 free throws, and then at that point it's like, this isn't going to go well for him. He's not someone who responds back from that punch, and I don't think he shot another shot for like 20 minutes in the game. Finished the game 5-14, but it was really disappointing from Andrew Wiggins, and obviously the biggest game of the season. David, you said that they came out and the team largely looked engaged, and it was an impressive first quarter, first half, but it wasn't from Andrew Wiggins. He did not rise to the occasion. And I think that's the taste that I'm going to leave this series with in my mouth about him, and not the fact that he was the most consistent player games 1 through 3. And really, isn't that just Andrew Wiggins in a nutshell?
Yeah. I mean, that needs to be said, too, that he was the most consistent player through games 1 through 3. And the most reassuring sign, Alan Horton tweeted it, and I embedded it in my article, was the shot selection was everything that we want. It was threes and it was inside shots. I think like 10% of his shots were from mid-range, which is great. But
real quick, David, I have something. Sorry to just cut you off. I wanted to respond to that because he will have that really good shot selection when it's going well.
Right,
And then as soon as he hits foul trouble, as soon as a couple don't go in, he misses a couple free throws, then he deviates from that plan. So, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, and the second that he deviated from that plan, it was just this downward spiral. And by the end of Game 5, it wasn't even a shred of the player that we saw through the first 3 games, which is troubling to see. And Dane, you wrote about the fact that, I mean, we have this guy now. I shouldn't say we. The Timberwolves have this guy now who's going to start his max contract next year. And if he's going to make the kind of money he's going to make, maybe it's a little bit cliche, but I mean, you need him to be consistent, whether that's the first 3 games version of Wiggins or something in between the best and the worst that we saw from Wiggins. There needs to be more consistent play than what we saw, simply put.
So we're at the end of the season. We have the opportunity to look back a little bit. This isn't necessarily going away. You mentioned the free throw thing. We've got the whole season and the playoffs now. Wiggins finished the season shooting
64.3% from the free throw line.
regular season
Worse than Bismack Biyombo.
Regular season 64.3%, postseason 12 of 20, 60%.
Smack Biyombo.
The thing that I find interesting with that is 12% drop from last season, and from every one of his first 3 seasons, he was 76% on the dot every time.
I know, it's crazy, right?
And he took 150 fewer free throws this season than he had in any previous season, fewer than any but his rookie year. He took 466 that year, 314 in the regular season, plus 20 in the playoffs this year.
Yeah. Well,
So I don't know if that, like...
Well, I had written about that earlier in the season.
Because we've talked about this all year. Because it's been, like, he'd gone through ruts like this earlier in his career, but he pulled it back.
But the first, 10, 15 games of the year, his average free throw mark was on par with every other year he's played. But his free throw percentage was down. And, I mean, just based on everything we're saying, the second that he hits sort of a rut in any way, he reverts to bad habits. And I don't think it's far-fetched to say that he was missing free throws and that reverted him to attacking or trying to get fouled less, thus going for more mid-range jumpers. It doesn't seem like a big leap to me.
He drove 157 fewer times this season. And on those, not only that is a negative because we know that he's not an efficient shooter from 3 or from 2.
Right.
That's a negative, but then, compounding that is the fact that he stopped drawing fouls on those drives. Throughout Wiggins' career, his strongest element of his game was driving and drawing fouls on those. If you look back at NBA.com's foul drawn percentage on drives, his early career, it's like, but somewhere between 12 and 15% of his drives he was fouled on, which with context, usually only big men are fouled over 10% of the time on their drives.
Yep.
And with Wiggins, we saw this year he lost that and he fell under 10%. He drew fouls on under 10% of his drives. So what does that mean? That means there's clearly a mental element to this. I mean, you don't just drop 12% from the free throw line over the course of 85 games and without there being a mental element. And there's clearly a mental element to his unwillingness to drive, or not unwillingness, but doing it less frequently and shying away from contact to some extent also seems fair.
So we've said this most of the season. He needs to shoot threes better. He needs to hit free throws. Those are things you can work on in the offseason. And hopefully, again, he comes out and says, this is what I worked on. I believe I've improved. Right? I mean, that's part of it. I think the hard thing is, how do you correct the defense? Like, this is something that's in Tibbs' wheelhouse, but if you're getting paid that much and have his athleticism, you should be able to slug on Harden, right?
I want to push back on that a little bit, because what was the one thing we praised Andrew Wiggins for like the entire regular season? It was his defense.
Or at least the second half.
Or at least the second half of it. That, like, I don't think it's fair to jump on him for not being engaged. Like, maybe for the situation, he should have been more engaged.
That's what I was saying. When I was ripping on his defense earlier, it was on specific to this series, and I was disappointed in how he guarded James Harden.
Because comparative, but that's like the point is, I think that his defense is something that was a strong suit this year and that can get better moving forward. So I don't like.
I think that's fair.
I think that's a narrative that's not a good one.
I agree. I think you can compare. It's not a perfect parallel, but I mean, Karl Anthony Towns was this efficient offensive force for most of the regular season, almost all of the regular season. But when they faced the Rockets in the first round, I mean, it was a progressive climb into more productivity as the series went on, but the Rockets mostly stifled him in that series. That kind of reminds me of Wiggins' defense, where, I mean, Towns is obviously like an elite offensive center. Andrew Wiggins is at best, he improved defensively. He's not like a lockdown defender at this point. But going from an improved defensive player to guarding James Harden in a playoff series, I feel like is a pretty big leap for a guy who's clearly not all the way there yet. But Towns, on the other hand, I mean, he had to adapt too, I guess is what I'm saying. Young guys playing in the playoffs the first time, they had to learn to adapt. Towns did it better than Wiggins, but I think there are obviously different levels of just productivity that you expect from Towns and Wiggins on those ends.
Let me. This is my grenade. It's someone else's grenade, but I'm tossing it. A local columnist said you have to trade Andrew Wiggins. I don't know if you guys, yeah, I will look up exactly what he wrote, but that's the gist of it.
Well, okay, I want to respond to that.
Yeah, and I just want a response.
That
To trading Andrew Wiggins?
to talk about that in an absolute is ridiculous because there's arguments and there's situations in which trading Andrew Wiggins makes sense.
Yep.
Sure.
And I guess that's what being a columnist forces you to do is kind of operate in those absolutes and, get clicked on. But
I'm glad that I didn't need a name and I was right.
I'm gonna go just to be clear what he wrote. This is Jim Souhan, Star Tribune. I'm giving you a couple lines here. The Wolves cannot afford to lose Jimmy Butler to free agency unless Wiggins is going to replace him as an ace defender, alpha personality, and go-to scorer. What are the chances of that happening?
Those things happening. Alpha personality is a 0% chance of happening.
Correct.
And being the defender that Jimmy Butler is a 0%.
This is
also correct.
This is the final line. Butler has it, meaning those three qualities. If the Wolves don't believe Wiggins can develop it, they might as well get rid of him now. That is the final line in the story.
Okay, so getting rid of him makes sense in some ways. It does.
Yeah.
But it requires a team not viewing Andrew Wiggins as a negative asset in the way that the Detroit Pistons viewed Blake Griffin as a positive asset. They went and got Blake Griffin, which I know maybe to somebody who isn't as familiar with the salary cap dealings. I mean, Blake Griffin is on a very, very daunting contract that it restricts the team he's on, and he also has an injury history. Andrew Wiggins doesn't have the injury history, but does not have the pedigree of Blake Griffin, and is on this daunting contract.
Also, Detroit was desperate.
That's the point I'm getting to. Is you need to trade Andrew Wiggins. It requires a team being similarly desperate to the Detroit Pistons, so that they are willing to give up. I mean, they gave up a package where they gave up a first-round pick, Tobias Harris, and Avery Bradley.
That's a good package for Blake Griffin.
That's a very, very good package for Blake Griffin. So, I mean, yeah, if the Wolves can find someone as dim as what the Pistons were to make that move, absolutely, you should trade him. But I don't think we can operate under the assumption that Andrew Wiggins, given this contract, is anywhere on the level of getting that deal. But I will say, Souhan's right in the notion that type of player, Andrew Wiggins is the type of player that a CJ McCollum, a Damian Lillard, and even the bigger names, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, if and when those things ever happen, that's the type of player teams often get back. They have their backs against the wall. Such and such player wants out. It's not working as it is. They have to trade the player and they get back as much as they can. Why not get a player who seems to have some upside or a chance at being a...
Obviously, for those bigger names, I think back to, the Kevin Love trade for Andrew Wiggins. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, the bigger names bring back guys that... you have to match salaries oftentimes. Sometimes teams have enough salary room to bring in bigger contracts, but... oftentimes they're trying to get guys on shorter deals than Andrew Wiggins too. So that's what makes it even harder. If Andrew Wiggins' deal was shorter, I think it's more doable. But until the NBA, just the masses see a more consistent version of Andrew Wiggins, a games 1 through 3 Andrew Wiggins, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be tough to get back what I think Wolves fans might be hoping for or expecting in the event that he were ever on the block. Because like you said, Dane, I mean, Blake Griffin has this injury history, but he also has a history of consistent, productive basketball. And when he was a young player, I mean, every year you saw him get better at different things and his effectiveness improved. You haven't seen that necessarily from Wiggins. You've seen flashes of like elite level superstardom, but it's just that. It's just flashes, and until then, it's going to be hard to trade.
I had to look at the name that popped into my head for a trade target, but I didn't realize that he's a free agent this offseason, so that doesn't work.
So
What was the name?
Boogie.
Oh,
so let me not
Boogie and Tibbs.
That would be fun.
Not Boogie. The throw a couple of things at you. First of all, he improves his 3-point shooting, improves his free throws. Maybe he changes the narrative, and you go.
And shot selection, right?
I think he's a freak athlete. I think he has shown up in big moments outside of your final taste.
the
Go
thing
ahead.
is just like improve your shooting, improve your free throws, improve your shot selection. That's a huge ask. I mean, check out Andrew. I mean, this is great podcasting, but I'm showing Tom Andrew Wiggins' shot chart this season.
Yeah, not
Looks
great.
like a murder scene.
It does.
It is all red because that means he in any of those
Outside of
places
in
he's red.
on the
the corners
and in the lane.
layups. Yeah. So I mean, Andrew Wiggins, there is a massive gap towards him being an average level.
So my
shooter.
what I'll say with shot selection.
Can I push back on that?
Sure.
At least on free throws.
What about from everywhere else?
Okay, I just want to touch the free throw point.
Okay.
Because I agree with the shot chart. That's fine. I think he can fix the free throws this offseason.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make that clear. If this is as much mental as I feel like it is, and I think we all feel like it is, I think that gets fixed. Just time in the gym, repetition, all of the above for that. I think the shot chart and the shot selection portion of that is a very fair question. Even though he did take his most threes total and per game in his career this season, not by much, but he did take a slight uptick. He's gone slightly up every year he's been in the league.
So here, take this. So take all of his 2-point jump shot, and this isn't the free throw point. This is back to the shot selection. Take all of his 2-point shots he took and all of his drives, and put that all together, and the points per possession that equals is less than when the Wolves waited for the shot clock to wind down to under 4 seconds and they threw up what is ever there. So meaning a shot that Andrew Wiggins chose to shoot within the rhythm of the offense was in the aggregate worse than, oh shit, the shot clock's running out, we got to put something up. And not all shots under 4 seconds are that, but a lot of them are. I mean, it is a terrible level of efficiency for Andrew Wiggins. And I know I'm crapping on Wiggins now. There are a lot of good things here, and I do believe that there are steps he can take, but we are operating. My point in saying this is when Tom said, get these things better, improve this, improve the percentages. We're not talking about 1 or 2% or making 15 or 20 more over the course of the year. We're talking about a full-on production change in the player he is.
33% on threes this year, which is right on his career average.
So here's my thing. If he improves threes, doesn't his shot chart improve because he's taking more threes that are more efficient shots and he's not relying on the mid-range work?
Well, he started doing that this year.
Yeah.
He was shooting 20% of his. He started as a rookie shooting 10% of his shots from three. He got up to last year shooting 20% of his shots from three. It's now up to 25% of his shots from three. So it's improving. The shot selection is improving. We are not seeing an overall improvement in his efficiency because he's making other sacrifices elsewhere. It's got to be a really big change. So I don't know, even if you throw another 5% on that, more shooting more threes, getting the bucket more, yeah, that's going to help. But that's not going to put him into this role that we need him, that Suhan is suggesting we need him to be.
The scary part of it for me is his career highs in like field goal percentage and 3-point percentage and free throw percentage are scattered throughout his career, which suggests, like, I'll step back and say, and I've written about it before, Wiggins has improved on individual parts of his game every year, and I think it's pretty noticeable. If you think back to his rookie year, he couldn't dribble to save his life. I think he's improved his passing. We talked about his defense already, but his general shooting efficiency and just his general numbers past where they are on the court, which is obviously important, it's scattered throughout his career, which suggests to me that, I mean, he's improving these little parts, but it's not honing into this overarching improvement on the court. And if you're a scorer and you're a young player and you're supposed to improve your efficiency scoring the ball, I mean, that's a troubling number.
So I think
12th on the team in effective field goal percentage.
I think that's all fair.
And led the team in field goal attempts.
Who's number one?
I'll do this. I don't.
Okay, 10 if you take out Anthony Brown and Justin Patton, who screwed that up. 10th, but he led the team in field goal.
Yeah, I think those are all troubling numbers.
My boy, so
He is dominating that list.
I think those are all fair concerns. I think it's not a foregone. I think, going to your point, I think the free throws probably will improve, or at least it seems more likely. The 3-point is still a question mark, right?
It seems fair to think that just based on his career so far, that this year was an outlier in terms of free throws. You can say that, I think.
The one noticeable improvement he had this year, which Tim alluded to a little bit, this was by far his best year in terms of turnovers. He improved his turnovers. He'd been right around 2.2 per 36 per game, and per 100, a little less than that per 100 possessions for his entire career. Dropped half a turnover off of that, which is a pretty significant drop. He's only turned it over like 1.7 times a game this year, and only
isn't devil's advocate to that, though, is playing alongside Jimmy Butler less of a ball dominant role to some extent
in theory, but he led the team in field goal
that's just
attempts.
me being negative.
Yeah,
but yeah, like I guess I'm at this point where I'm just so unwilling to even find forgiveness.
I'm still trying.
Yeah.
So,
which is fair.
let me
actually probably smart.
I have a question for Dane. Is there a way to fix Wiggins that just could potentially improve on where he receives the ball in an offensive possession, like where on the court? Because I'm picturing the scenario in my head where he's only basically allowed to catch the ball at the wing outside of the 3-point arc ever. Mm-hmm. So that at that point he has to make a decision. Am I open enough to take a three? Gives him the most amount of time to wind up and take a drive, use his athleticism to get past his defender, or that he shouldn't just back away from the post-ups, back away from catching inside the arc ever. Just use the athleticism, use the skill, and force yourself to improve the threat of the 3-point range, which that's almost coming at it from a coaching perspective rather than from a player development perspective, but it's like limit him to becoming that kind of threat, I guess.
Well, I think what you just see with the Timberwolves in general is the places that they position their players are very traditional in that the 5 is typically in one spot, the 4 is in the dunker spot, and then you have the wings there. What you'll see with other teams when they have a player who's maybe a wing but has post-up skills is they'll scatter that. And they'll say, so in this example, they'll say, Andrew Wiggins, take on, play the dunker spot in this position, or even more so, which something I think Wiggins is good at is posting up. Mm-hmm. Put him in the 5 spot, and it's there are ways to do that in small chunks. Another thing to do, and we saw a lot of this was with Butler at the 4, is they can play smaller lineups and they can kind of put Wiggins more in the 4 position, something they run a lot of times.
Because he has some skills that would appeal to that.
And some size. Mm-hmm. I mean, the horn set, which where you have the 2 big guys up at the elbow, that's something the Wolves ran a ton last year and still some this year, but that was always done with Gibson and Towns, or the season before Jang and Towns. You can put Wiggins in a spot like that. So yes, but I think the way that you really use him differently is more of a dedication to cutting after the pass.
Yes.
And I think that's huge. Even on just post entries, every time he goes in for the post entry, I think his initial reaction is to take a step back and be there for the kick or the kick out and the repost. But with Wiggins, I would say the best thing you can do is find a way to have him, come alongside, follow through the baseline and a cut, or a split cut through the middle of the lane. It just keeps it moving, and those type of cuts open up other cuts for other people. Or maybe or if it's Jeff Teague with the post entry, instead of Jeff Teague, he always kind of goes back out to half court and gets away. Have Teague cut through, and then that opens up another cutting lane, because cuts inherently confuse the defense. I mean, at the simplest of levels, the Wolves don't. I mean, there's just not the volume of that. So I mean, that's why I would say there are different ways to use him.
Because that's the thing is, he has identifiable skills on offense that we've seen before, some of which are more efficient than the fact that he can hit a contested long 2.
Yeah. And finding ways to increase that volume, and I think that's a good thought is what are the different ways we can use someone. Obviously, the comparison people make all the time is Rudy Gay.
Yep.
Which doesn't totally work, but it kind of fits.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at the way Rudy Gay was used in San Antonio this year. He was basically a power forward for them.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of the time, and there's things he could still do as a 3, but what the Spurs needed him to do was be more of a 4, more of a stretch big. And so I guess, again, just to that point, there's more ways to get creative, but inherently the Wolves offense is just pounding the rock of this is what we do, and we believe upon repetition that it is going to find success.
Yeah.
And the argument at the end of the day is 4th overall offensive rating in the league, and Tibbs has a lot to fall back on there. But
And the counter argument is when Houston made their runs in Game 4 and Game 5, the defense was bad and the offense could not score, doing the things that they know how to do. Is they just got everything they knew how to do taken away from them because they were so repetitive and so predictable.
everyone I've talked to, when kind of that 4th overall offensive rating comes up, we're like, oh yeah, the Wolves offense has been successful, but are they really the 4th best offense in the league? And I think what that really is saying is when it comes to the playoffs, what level are they going to produce at? And I do think it was an above average offense, definitely, maybe even top 10. But to kind of believe in that elite offense, a top 4 level offense as like truth and law, I don't think that's an assumption. So creativity is, a necessity towards making that offense even better, not just for the regular season, but for the playoffs
and
as a whole.
If they're the 4th best offense, just looking at the rest of the league, what could they be doing to make their offense a top? How little of a change puts them from 4th in offensive rating to top 3, top 2, number 1? I'm not saying that this group is necessarily equipped to compete with Houston and Golden State for that quote unquote title, but if they're 4th with the style of basketball they play, I just wonder what little changes could be made to make that happen.
Would you say, stronger defense leading to more turnovers?
Yeah,
more
that's probably the simplest thing, considering how bad they are defensively. Think of how many more buckets they could get just by playing better defense and getting out in transition. And I'm on the offensive rating list right now. Cleveland, Denver, Milwaukee, LA, New Orleans, Oklahoma City are the teams that go 5 through 10 in the
After
NBA
the
in
Wolves,
offensive rating. How many of those teams, I guess if you want to make a case for the Wolves, and maybe they are a top 4 offense in the league, how many of those teams that I just named do you guys think are clearly, better
in the playoff
offenses?
sense of offense, or do
Sure,
we really
yeah,
believe in?
yeah.
I would say Cleveland as an offense, and I would say the Pelicans and the Thunder, and then you look at
the Pelicans have definitely turned into a new beast in the playoffs.
And then the Nuggets are a very good offense too, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily fair to put.
They're
them
more
above.
comparable to Minnesota.
Sure.
I think that's fair.
But yeah, no, like the Bucks and the Clippers, I don't think I would be like the Bucks offense or the Clippers offense is a better shot at beating the taking on the Rockets than the Wolves did. So that is a good point. But still, at the end of the day, it's that tier of team
Totally.
that I don't think offensively can match wits, particularly in a playoff series with the Golden States and Houston's.
I think the broader point I'm trying to make here is I think that's the wrong. Souhan's agenda for Wiggins is wrong. I don't think that's how. I think what you have to look at is age. Butler's 28. Mm-hmm. If you supermax him, he's 30 through 35 is when you're signing him. Wiggins is 23. He's signed 23 to 28 when a lot of improvement will take place. And for him, the agenda seems to be hit free throws, hit threes. I know the element of threes is not guaranteed. The free throws not guaranteed, but more likely. But I'm just saying, I think it's setting the wrong agenda. I think they can coexist. And
I already pushed back at this, but I just don't. I don't think it's that simple with Andrew. Like, to get to being a max player, it's not about Andrew Wiggins needs to do more than make a lot more shots and make more free throws. He needs to do a lot more than just that.
But isn't some of that coaching and some of it would be remedied by shooting better? I'm trying to use maybe too simple of agendas, but I'm just saying it's so far off from what I think.
If we want to use the Rudy Gay comparison, there have been years when Rudy Gay has shot pretty well, like 38, 39%, but he wasn't like a max player those years, if that makes any sense. But let's take a step back because we've been talking for Andrew Wiggins for about a half an hour.
Literally.
And there are other players on the Timberwolves.
If you want more, zonecoverage.com.
Go read
Dane
Dane's
Moore
piece.
wrote a piece that was, it was good. It was good, and it was about Andrew Wiggins. So go read that.
That was one giant plug just for Dane.
Woo! Yeah. What are some non-Andrew Wiggins takeaways from? It can be from the last game. It can be from the playoffs as a whole. Is there anything else that really stuck out in this postseason? It can be Karl Anthony Towns' struggles. It can be Derrick Rose's success. Is there anything that you guys want to touch on that stood out to you?
There should be a statement that I think that the Timberwolves would have performed better if they were anywhere near 100% healthy. I was going to say, I don't think we know Jimmy Butler wasn't 100%. Tom Thibodeau talked about that after the game as a reason why he didn't come in early in the fourth quarter when it looked like everything was on the line, which it was. And we know Taj has been working through injuries.
And I think that slipped through the cracks a little bit, too. I think he was definitely injured in this series also.
And that's like, considering how much of a focal point Taj was to the defense of the Timberwolves this year, the fact that they were against a juggernaut in Houston, but even this was not the best that the Timberwolves defense could possibly have had, because two of their best and most important defensive players weren't playing at 100%.
It felt like in Game 3, similar to the Denver game in Game 82, because if the case is being made that Butler and Taj weren't fully healthy, which I agree with, it felt like in Game 82 and then in Game 3 of the playoffs that they sacrificed their bodies in every way that they could, which I would imagine takes a heavy, heavy toll on following days and following games, because those games felt like total outliers for the rest of like the recent sample size, I guess. I mean, think about Jimmy Butler in Game 3 and then Jimmy Butler in Games 4 and 5. It was just a totally different player. Taj Gibson's best game might have been in Game 5, honestly, but I totally buy it. What I'm saying is I buy into the Wolves being not totally healthy and that playing a factor. But like what everything comes down to with Houston, and was kind of the general theme of my article, whether it's my Game 5 article, which was essentially whether it's Andrew Wiggins' his first 3 games, Karl Anthony Towns slowly starting to figure it out and sort of regaining his aggressiveness in Game 5, Derrick Rose's success, whatever have you. Playing the Houston Rockets kind of makes all of that obsolete information at the end of the series because they're so much better than the Timberwolves.
Right. It was like almost hard to have real takeaways because they seemed even the positives seemed a little futile. But we do need to still recognize them.
Even the negatives could be so exaggerated to a certain degree.
But then you turn around and you're like, if Taj had 10% more and Jimmy had 10% more, and the Timberwolves had clinched two games before the end of the season, do they steal Game 1 in Houston, which they were very close to doing? But
then if that happens, if we're going by like the butterfly effect, if they win Game 1 in Houston, are they more inclined to really come out hard in Game 3 in Minneapolis?
Exactly. Can I ask almost kind of the opposite of the direction of you're going? I think we knew this was a 4 or 5 game series. I think Game 3 is the big positive you take away. That is the first playoff game in 14 years. I've told a few people this. It did kind of remind me of the Wolves of my youth when it was KG and there was some thought that they could build something around him, right?
That your friends would actually watch the game with
right,
you.
Right. And that people knew what I was talking about exactly with that game.
I'm half kidding.
And so I that's a major takeaway. But you go from that Game 3 through the first half of Game 4, and then that 50-game quarter on was the exact opposite, right? Like, you thought maybe they could win Game 4 given the first 24 minutes, how that was played, right? Even though we knew it was going to be 5 games, even though, like, the result last night was pretty predictable, did anything in this series change your perception of the team and what they should do in the offseason from where you were before the playoffs started?
No.
Does that make sense?
I think a really informative thing for me was seeing Butler at the 4 and less Taj Gibson. And after Game 3, or entering Game 3, I was talking to Tim, you were there, and Britt, and we were just kind of like, man, Taj has been so great for this team, but do we really need a traditional power forward? And I think in ways like Taj put up great stats. He was such a heart of this team and just a good dude. But this series informed me a little bit that maybe for this team to take another stride, at least offensively, which again, people come back. Taj is a huge part of the defense. But Taj's presence is a big part of what pushed Towns to the corner in games 1 and 2, which we saw had some adverse effects. And then we saw Butler play and at the 4, and that helped a bunch. It's something we saw we saw 96 minutes of during the regular season with Towns.
Not much at all.
And we saw it a lot. We saw it a lot in the playoffs. So for me, a takeaway is something that I'll be thinking about as I kind of think about roster construction things is, obviously there's this way too many bigs on the team, but maybe that's really an adjustment that can be made, and that could be Taj off the bench, or that could be moving Taj.
And it leads directly into our points about Wiggins earlier, about maybe playing Wiggins in that 4-ish role from time to time.
Yep.
Is if you free up a slot like that you have two different players who have skills that you can use in that more type of those spots on the floor that are traditionally filled by power forward. Yeah. You've got two guys with size and skills that fit in that already as a part of your roster construction. And Butler's obviously the better player, but it's like we already talked. You might see some of Wiggins' better skills come out if you use him in that way too.
Can I make a counterpoint to the small ball lineup? I feel like there's a little bit of recency bias with that small ball lineup because that was the lineup that built the 10-point lead in Game 5, but it was also deployed early in the regular season and it failed miserably.
But only for 2 games.
Right, but what's the sample size for the playoffs? Not much more than that, right?
Well, if we're giving credit to these games as being more high leverage.
Sure, that's fair. I'm just saying
I think Houston really highlighted it too. And what we saw was, again, the first 2 games, you have Cat posting up, and Taj's man is right there to bring the baseline double because Taj was not allowed to be in the corner for the corner 3. And then you see Jimmy Butler in that Taj role, and he's in the corner, and they can't afford to leave Jimmy Butler wide open for the corner 3, and they can't send that baseline double on Towns. So I hear what you're saying, and it's recency, but I guess why my feeling about it is stronger is because of the way I saw it affect Karl Towns.
I think that lineup could be useful in the playoffs. I think it could be useful against certain teams. I struggle to see it as an effective tool against every team, just because I've seen it fail before. But also, I do want to those lineups weren't entirely the same because the small ball lineup that they used at the beginning of the year featured Tyus and Teagan Crawford. And, I mean, Derrick Rose is a difference. The team played a bunch of games, and they got familiar with each other, so that's important, too. I do wonder what that lineup would look like with the slightly reshuffled bench, where maybe it's, not to throw him under the bus, but maybe if it's not Jamal Crawford, maybe if it's a more efficient defensive player in his place.
That leads directly into the question I was going to ask you guys. Taj and Crawford are on the last year of their deal, right? Next season?
Well, Crawford has a player option, so it's his choice if he returns next season.
And we're kind of assuming he will, right?
I'm not.
I don't think he's coming back.
No?
I'm not.
Because you think Rose took his spot.
I think he might just not want to be on this team because he's 38 and wants to contend.
Okay.
I think he expected to play more minutes than he did, and I think he still thinks he can get those minutes on a winning team elsewhere.
He could be back, and I know that Tim. We're not assuming he leaves, but it's not our assumption.
I don't think it's a given.
Yes,
it's certainly as much as some other people may assume, because there's a lot of when you see a player option that is as much money as his is for a guy of his age. The assumption is that he's going to take that money, because he might not get it elsewhere.
Here's an interesting thing, though: is he's such a long-term veteran that his veteran minimum is $2.5 million is what he gets paid, and this player option is only $4.3 million. So it's not as big of a gap where if it's the veteran minimum that he takes somewhere else, he can literally go play wherever he wants. Anybody can bring on a veteran player. The team only has to pay him $1.5 million, and the league pays the rest of that.
Yep.
So that's just he has options to go anywhere else he wants if he's cool with sacrificing $1.8 million, and maybe he can even get $4 or $5 million elsewhere too.
I think he can. I really think Jamal Crawford has developed somewhat of a reputation in the league for still being that 3-time Sixth Man of the Year title on his resume. I think it still matters, and I know he hasn't had the year that some people were hoping for. He's not the player he was. I think that's obvious, but I think his reputation can get him more than the minimum.
So my point here, and it's the same kind of question, is that if you don't like the Crawford role or don't like his defense or whatever, and you're worried about, I think Taj at some point hits a wall if he doesn't, like, literally very soon because of the injuries, because of he played for Tibbs, because I mean, seriously, but because he's just getting older, right?
Yeah.
If you don't like the player they are and what they have to offer, even if they're still good, I feel like they ate what's his name's contract, right? The Aldrich, right?
Yeah.
Like if Taj really is not helping the team out, you could. I know there's a Tibbs factor here, but you could bench him if there's a better lineup to deploy to start.
Well, that's where the inherent issue.
We haven't even talked about that whole aspect of it, right? Like what?
You can't go get anyone.
Well, that's not even what I was going to say. Was
Without
like
moving Jang.
well,
Even without moving Jang, like delete Gorgie Jang from the roster and a poof magic. Like the first, if someone eats them all into cap space, just like that, which won't happen, but that is the best possible thing. They still don't have cap space.
Yep.
You're still up against the wall. You
Still
can't
gotta sign Towns,
and it's not even
And
that.
Towns
Even
doesn't
without
hit, 'cause
Towns,
Towns doesn't hit
Towns'
next
money
year.
doesn't even kick in.
duh. Yeah, you're
They're
right.
just so far up against because Wiggins makes so much money, Teague makes so much money, Gibson makes so much money. I mean, they're already up against.
What is a better lineup? Like even if it's just
Aaron
game
Brooks,
to game.
Marcus George's Hunt,
Yeah, let's do it.
Anthony Brown, Emil Jefferson, Cole Aldrich. Let's go.
What lineup?
Not playing Justin Patton at the 5. How dare you?
He's hurt.
Maybe still. Maybe not by next season.
That is a weird. I feel like we even should give like 2 minutes to Justin Patton, but
We need
for
Lucas
right now.
Seaver for that.
right now, even if it's game to game, if Taj is not in the starting lineup, what lineup do you deploy, and is it effective?
Well, I think Tim has a point in not maybe making Jimmy Butler the power forward for the starting lineup, like that being the starting lineup with him and Wiggins as the forwards. But I feel that you would like look around the league, and there are very few teams who are starting or deploying two big lineups, and yeah, maybe that leads to some more wear and tear. But I think that's becoming the norm.
Can you start Bielitsa?
Is he going to be on the team?
Let's say he is. We don't know, but
If the option is Taj Gibson or Bielitsa as a starter, I'd take Taj.
did
Hell yeah.
Bielitsa?
Yeah. Taj is still good. I'm talking about a full-on like like there's nobody else that should play on this current team over Taj Gibson.
Currently,
real quick, unless go ahead.
Oh,
But if they want to if they want to just start one big, why would you not just start Tyus Jones next to Jeff Teague and start the two wings at 3 and 4?
I'm not opposed to this, depending on who your opponent is.
I mean, Derrick Rose is coming back.
Derrick Rose is coming back. You know who the other guard's
I was
going to
say that was one of my conclusions from the playoff series. Is
he's coming back.
My expectation of Derrick Rose coming back was already at like 80%. He's coming back. There is no question in my mind.
God, for the last time, this is going to be. I'm going to start with this a caveat that I'm talking strictly on court, and that's
yes.
I don't think I need to do that anymore, but I'm going to say that I am very pleasantly surprised with how much more productive Derrick Rose has been since he signed here.
And I think the argument why you wouldn't start.
Like I know people are freaked out by what Tibbs might offer him, or that he'll be back, or whatever,
or that
but
he starts in
the
that
fact of the matter is, for me, I saw more production from him off the bench than any other bench player on the Wolves. In this series.
That was kind of a national conclusion too, just for whatever that's worth. Like a lot of people picked up on that by watching it. Why I'm worried about Tyus, just real quick, is that if that's your backup point guard, do you want him starting? You know what I mean?
If
like
you
that.
got Rose.
I mean, I was gonna say, do you worry about minutes? But maybe we don't.
But like all of this comes back to, I mean, we talk about trading Wiggins, trading Taj, benching Taj, starting Tyus, whatever have you. If Tom Thibodeau is the coach of this team, I would assume none of that will happen.
Yeah, we're wrestling here with some fantasy versus reality, and so it's hard for us to say what we would do or what we would want to do when we know that we've come to pretty well understand what Tom Thibodeau's tendencies are and what his preferences are. So yeah, it's one conversation about like what David would do as the GM, and I'm not even saying that like those things are bad or not, but we're wrestling with a reality that we know that there's no way in hell.
Yeah.
some of those, some of those things, and I'm assuming if Tibbs is still here as president of basketball operation, there's almost no way in hell that Taj would be moved, and
there's no way in hell that Derrick Rose would be retained.
The fantasy opens up, and I would argue with a GM who is wiser than what is currently in place that some of more of this fantasy. There will be more creativity put into the offseason if it's a different at least GM or GM and coach. But we don't know that at this point, and the assumption kind of that we're operating under is that Tom Thibodeau is still here for 3 years and $24 million more, and that's
as long as that's the case, next year the starting lineup will almost certainly be Jeff Teague, Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, Taj Gibson, Karl Anthony Towns.
Yep, the same as it was.
Derrick Rose will come off the bench. I mean,
but you can make adjustments during the season. I mean,
you can.
Where I'm going to push back on this is I think Tibbs, going back to my, what do you call that, zapping analogy, right? He's kind of zapping him awake, defibrillator. Maybe he can transform. I think that's what he did. He literally was like, I'm bringing my guys from Chicago. We're going to the playoffs, baby. And he just he went crazy man Tibbs and got this team in the playoffs. If he's not Mark Jackson, if he's going to be a guy who's going to be here long term, assuming this team can reach the heights of Houston, Golden State 3 years from now or whatever, he has to adjust. He has to be a cup of coffee. He can't be defibrillator.
Did he do that in Chicago?
But did they ever get to it? I guess they got to a point maybe where you thought they could beat the Heat. I don't know. We saw Chicago was weird.
I mean,
part
of it's because Chicago, I think, was always considered a team that could beat the Heat, but injuries derailed any chance.
You said that. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
But just talking about Tom Thibodeau with the Wolves, I don't think there's a ton of evidence to suggest that he's willing to suddenly adjust his philosophy. They seem pretty set in stone.
I really can't see that happening.
Even just talking about Rose, who I just admitted played a lot better than I expected in the playoffs. When he was playing like crap, granted he was. I think you can make the case that he was rusty. Tibbs played him more and more and more, and he played Tyus less and Gorgie less. And if we're talking about just the Chicago guys that he brought in, or just generally guys that he brought in, look at a bad shot that say a Nemanja Bjelica or a Tyus Jones takes. They get yanked. Look at a bad shot Jamal Crawford takes. Not even a reaction, not even a scoff from Tim. So I hear what you're saying, but I struggle to see a scenario where Tibbs adjusts suddenly. It just he seems to be who he is, for better or for worse.
Yeah, the only thing I saw, and this is very small and I don't want to read into it too much, he was lunatic. He burned as many calories during those games as some players did, right, in his first year. And he just seemed to just constantly be frustrated.
His vocal cords are jacked.
Right, yeah. I mean, but it felt like he was just kind of expressing his frustration just throughout the whole game, every game 2 years from now, I guess. This year he did calm down a little bit, maybe because he was like, Taj and Jimmy got this. I guess, and maybe he can make adjustment in year 3. He's going to have to adjust. Otherwise, he literally will be here as long as kind of I think
until this window's well, I think until this window's over, where we talk about, which is the Teague and Taj were brought in.
Exactly.
Until the next
that seems to be the most
one thing I want to. I generally fall in line with you guys where I feel like Tibbs is somewhat of a known commodity, but then I also think back to revisionist history a little bit on all this Tibbs thing. When he was hired, we understood him as this defensive coach. And that that was our assumption. We thought we knew who he was there. And then when he came in and this last offseason, he came in and was the president of basketball operations. We thought we knew who Tibbs was as a defensive oriented coach. And he didn't go out and get anyone defensive. He didn't go out and get anyone defensive, but a lot of his moves were made on the margins from a Teague, Crawford, Derrick Rose here were to bring in offensive type players. So I guess what I'm saying, and after being around him a large amount this season, is that I don't feel like we necessarily know Tom Thibodeau. He doesn't let you in. I don't know if we have a great understanding of who he actually is as a person, and it's just our kind of group.
That's fair.
Our group, you know what I'm saying? It's like this group kind of mentality that we've all talked about and such, and we have some frustrations with him, and we see some actions, but actually a lot of Thibodeau's stuff has shown some willingness to make changes or to deviate from what our actual our initial understanding was. So maybe that's spinning things positively, but I do think there's a chance that, we don't know for sure what Tibbs is going to do next season. I think, it's probably the same group again, but maybe he'll surprise us again because we don't actually know who Tibbs is.
So I know we're running a little bit short on time.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. Do we think Nemanja Bjelica is back on this team next year?
Yes, he didn't increase his value in the playoffs. And I think he's valuable to the team.
I still wonder if there's a team out there that sees his skill set and would be interested in it.
Also, would he
interested in it to the tune of something the Timberwolves won't match or can't match?
No, I don't think Nemanja Bjelica will be back next season.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Why though?
Someone's gonna throw some money
But would
at
he
him.
rather go to the Kings and make more money and have no chance to win, or be on the Wolves and have a chance to win?
I don't think it's about that. It's about the Wolves' willingness to match or not. I mean, that's what restricted free agency is he's going to go out and, probably get unless right away the Wolves are like, hey, this is a deal, we want to give it to you, let's agree to it. I don't see that happening.
But what contending team has money where you can bully the Wolves out of their
But again,
cash?
you're just assuming that you think that he's not going to want to go to the Kings. Right?
I think
that's the
I
assumption
think
I make.
know that.
Nemanja Bjelica is approaching 30 and has been a big minute starter as a professional basketball player for every year of his career before he joined the NBA. It would not shock me in the slightest if he wanted to just spread his wings and get minutes on a bad team. But on top of that, one, I'll say I think Tom Thibodeau likes Nemanja Bjelica more than the minutes he gives him might suggest, which goes back to the whole, we don't really know Tom Thibodeau, so I don't know what he would do with an offer sheet that Bjelica would sign. But part of me thinks, I'll put it this way, I wouldn't be shocked if Bjelica signed an offer sheet of a reasonable amount of money that the Wolves could match, and maybe you could argue should match if you value Bjelica's skill set, but don't, because the front office thinks that they can upgrade that position. I'll put it that way.
The Wolves have a couple ways to grab players. One of them is Bjelica. Another one is the mid-level exception.
Yes,
Those are kind of the two main ways we're looking at improving this team this year. And I think the goal, and this is my guess, from an organizational standpoint, from Glenn Taylor, is and Tibbs and Layden too, is that they're not going to want to commit money that spills over from this window into the next window, because then if they sign somebody to the mid-level exception for 4 years at $9 million a year, that money is going to be there once they're in the luxury tax, and that $9 million turns into maybe $27 million for Bjelica. So they need to be considering those things. So the reason I'm saying that is if Bjelica can find a team that will give him a multi-year deal, or for sure a 4-year deal, my assumption is that the Wolves would not bring him
that's
back.
really
At that.
I can't see
That's
them
fair.
matching on a multi-year deal like that.
Nor is that really smart.
But we don't know. But
we don't. But that's the entire point.
You know what,
we speculate.
the whole theme of this podcast is we don't actually know anything.
Yeah, and that's the fun.
Subscribe on iTunes.
Of it. Jamal Crawford, yes or no?
No, I think he will leave.
I think he's back.
My gut would be that he's back, but I also see that one as pretty close, like the Bjelica one. And I guess that is informed by the fact that I see him close with Butler and Taj.
I was just going to say, I need to take a couple steps back because his relationship with Jimmy Butler and Jimmy Butler's role on this team, if Glenn Taylor is serious about Butler being sort of a guy that recruits people, as he put it, I don't see a scenario where Butler doesn't try to convince Crawford to stay, if nothing else, because I think they're just like locker room chatter and general back and forth suggests to me that they're friends.
Any sort of breaking up of the Teague and Taj or any of those guys,
Yep.
I think that would, if any of those are to happen, then Crawford's going to say, no, then I'm not part of this. I think he would want to do it with this group. So I think it's probably close to 50-50. And because my gut of what I'm taking of what I'm what I believe to be true is that the starting line will stay largely the same, then I would guess that he's back.
Do we assume that Gorgui Dieng is the most likely rotation piece to leave, like including Crawford and Belly? Do you think that's fair?
I think Bielitz is the most likely to leave of the rotation.
I think it's okay. So this perception is teams in cap hell. What's the worst contract? Gorgui Dieng need to get off that to get out of cap hell. The reality is that even moving Gorgui Dieng does not necessarily move this team out of cap hell.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just asking: is he the most likely to go?
General question.
I know. I'm framing this because I think that there is a strong argument to be said that his contract's not totally sunk. That they would perhaps, not want to get rid of him because it would cost the first round pick, and they need players to come off their bench next year. Somebody, and Gorgui Dieng could do that passively, and the first round pick could maybe do that also. Could be a bench player, or could be a tool used to getting a bench player. And so it makes sense from a long-term perspective to trade away Gorgui Dieng, to package a first-round pick to trade him. But there's also, for a next-year perspective, they might not want to give up assets to get rid of him.
It's fair.
That is reasonable.
And he tends to play well along talents for long minutes.
And if you want to make a case, I mean, we were talking about Wiggins and the value that his contract brings. And we talked about Belly. Gorgui Dieng did not play a lot this year. When he played, he wasn't his former self. Obviously,
unless he was playing the New Orleans Pelicans.
Yeah, fair. His trade value, I mean, with the first-round pick, obviously he has trade value, but he alone, with the contract he has, it's going to be tough to move him, I think.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be
even with the pick,
really tough.
There's nothing. I really hope if Gorgui ends up being on the block or makes the news, makes the rounds or whatever, I hope people aren't going to be shocked or disappointed when what they get back isn't much better than Gorgui Dieng himself, even with the pick attached.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to get much for him.
Yeah, it'll be a next to nothing. I think my hope is that you get a player who's also on a bad contract, but better fits this team. Like something I tweeted out today was DeMar Carroll.
Yeah, you've said that before too.
And
He has one.
yeah,
does he have one less year on his contract too?
He has just next year on his contract at the same cost as Gorgui. So you get off at 2 more years for a player who's kind of sunk, but maybe you can get another pick back or another little small asset from the Nets maybe they take out Gorgui Dieng if you give him a first-round pick. But that's kind of that would be the best case for Gorgui Dieng. A move for Gorgui Dieng is to get back another player who can be the 7th, 8th, or 9th man.
Right on. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up with that. We are going to be off on Sunday. We're going to take a couple days off, but we'll be back
At the Tibbs press conference.
We'll be at the end of the year, the media availability, which includes Tibbs, but I think includes every player on the roster. It's essentially
the exit interviews.
Right. It's essentially media day at the end of the year where people are more sad.
We'll see how many people Tibbs lets talk.
That's it. Does he have that option? Or
yeah, it's media day is the only day that's requirement for all of them. I'm not. Because last year at the press conference,
I thought most rotation guys generally talk. I have never been to it. I'll be straight up, but I'm going to be there.
Last year it was just Tibbs.
Well, and they also haven't exactly had a post-season session like this in 14 years. So
we'll see.
Might be new.
Regardless, I'll be there, and we'll have some written content up about it. Dane and I will be just writing like crazy throughout the offseason, but we'll be back next Sunday for our next Wolves Wired. We'll talk about the playoffs. We'll talk about, whatever else happens. We'll talk about LeBron joining the Wolves inevitably. Whatever else have you. But until then, for David Naylor at Prof Cedar, Tom Schreier at T Schreier3, Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA, I'm Tim Faklis at TIMFAKLIS. Thanks for following us along this entire season and throughout the playoffs. We appreciate you subscribing, and if you don't, you should subscribe, please. We actually do know things, or a couple things. This has been another edition of Wolves Wired. We'll see you next time.
Wolves in 9.